Some souls stop breathing long before their hearts do. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from tonight. And if you believe second chances sometimes arrive on four tired paws, stay with me until the end of this story. Snow drifted slowly across Euclid Avenue like ashes falling from a forgotten fire. Cleveland looked colder after midnight, the kind of cold that settled deep into old buildings and older regrets. Streetlights flickered weakly against the storm clouds hanging low over the city, casting pale reflections across puddles of half-frozen slush. The wind carried the scent of gasoline, wet concrete, and distant chimney smoke as Nathan Hale stepped out of his rusted Ford pickup and pulled his coat tighter around his chest. He stood still for a moment beneath the buzzing neon sign that read Retired Canine Adoption Event, all dogs $10. The sign buzzed louder than the traffic. Nathan stared at it with tired gray eyes that no longer expected good things from the world. At 42 years old, he carried himself like a man held together by routine alone. Tall once, strong once, now worn thin by sleepless nights, overdue bills, and memories that refused to stay buried. A faint scar curved beneath his jawline, disappearing into the collar of his flannel shirt, while silver threaded through the dark hair at his temples. 3 years earlier, he had been a respected police officer. Now he worked occasional overnight security jobs nobody else wanted. His apartment had no heat half the time. His phone buzzed daily with collection notices he no longer opened. Earlier that evening, his landlord had taped a final warning to his door. Nathan had stared at it for nearly 10 minutes before leaving the apartment just to escape the silence inside. He hadn't come looking for a dog. Truthfully, he wasn't sure what he was looking for anymore. The shelter sat near the edge of the industrial district beside an abandoned hardware store and a shuttered laundromat with broken windows covered in plywood. Snow collected against the chain-link fence surrounding the property. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed softly above rows of kennels. The warmth hit Nathan first. Then the sound. Barking echoed through the concrete hallways. Some loud, some desperate, some exhausted. Dogs pacing, scratching, hoping. But near the very end of the corridor, one kennel remained silent. Nathan slowed without understanding why. Inside lay an aging German shepherd on a folded gray blanket. The dog didn't bark when people passed, didn't lift his head. His sable coat had faded around the muzzle with age, and one ear bent slightly at the tip from an old injury. A thick black collar rested against his neck, worn smooth by years of service. He looked less like a dog waiting for adoption and more like a soldier waiting to be forgotten. A volunteer carrying a clipboard noticed Nathan staring. "That one's Valor," she said quietly. "Retired police K9. 9 years old." Nathan nodded faintly. Valor still hadn't moved. "Nobody wants him?" he asked. The woman hesitated before answering. "He stopped letting people get close after his handler died last year." The words settled heavily in the room. Nathan looked back through the kennel bars. Something tightened in his chest unexpectedly. The volunteer sighed softly. "Tomorrow morning." She stopped herself before finishing. She didn't need to. Nathan understood anyway. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Somewhere farther down the hallway, another dog barked wildly. But Valor remained still, eyes half closed against the cold world around him. Then slowly, almost painfully, the old shepherd lifted his head. His amber eyes locked onto Nathan for the first time. And in that silent moment, neither of them looked abandoned anymore. The shelter volunteer stood beside the kennel quietly, rubbing warmth back into her hands with tired fingers. Her name tag, read Melissa Carter, faded around the edges from too many long winters inside the building. Snow tapped softly against the narrow windows behind her, while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like restless insects. Nathan kept his eyes on Valor. The old German shepherd had lowered himself back onto the blanket, but he was still watching him now. Calm, careful, like a man measuring another man without needing words. "He used to work narcotics and tracking," Melissa said softly. 8 years with Cleveland Metro K9. Nathan nodded once. "What happened to his handler?" Melissa hesitated before answering. "Heart attack. Last winter." The words seemed to settle heavily inside the kennel. Valor shifted slightly at the sound of her voice, but never looked away from Nathan. "After that," she continued, "they retired him. Nobody wanted to take on an older police dog with medical bills." Nathan glanced down at the dog's back leg. The shepherd carried himself stiffly, favoring the right side just enough to notice if you had spent years reading people and movement the way police officers did. Melissa followed his gaze. Arthritis in the hip, partial vision loss in one eye. He does not trust strangers much anymore. Nathan let out a quiet breath through his nose. Sounds expensive. Melissa gave a small, sad smile. That too. Somewhere near the front office, a phone rang briefly before falling silent again. The storm outside deepened, wind rattling loose ice against the gutters. Nathan slid his hands into the pockets of his old canvas jacket and stepped closer to the kennel gate. Valor did not growl, did not move away. The dog simply watched him with those steady amber eyes that looked strangely human beneath the harsh lights. Nathan had spent enough years around officers and suspects to recognize exhaustion when he saw it. Valor looked exhausted in the same way he felt exhausted. Not physically, spiritually. Melissa unclipped the kennel latch slowly. You can meet him if you want. Nathan looked at her. He bites. Only if somebody lies to him. For the first time in weeks, something almost resembling a smile touched Nathan's face. He stepped inside carefully, boots scraping softly against the concrete floor. The kennel smelled faintly of antiseptic, wet fur, and old blankets that had been washed too many times. Valor remained still as Nathan crouched a few feet away. Up close, the shepherd looked even older. Gray threaded through the fur around his muzzle like winter frost along dead grass. The black collar around his neck was worn smooth with age, the leather cracked near the buckle. Nathan noticed faded stitching near the tag ring, where a badge number used to sit. Removed now. Forgotten by everyone except the dog still carrying it. Hey, partner, Nathan said quietly. Valor's ears twitched at the word. Nathan slowly held out one hand, palm low and open. I am not here to bother you. For several seconds nothing happened. Snow hissed against the windows. Somewhere down the hallway, another dog barked frantically before being hushed by a volunteer. Then Valor moved. Slowly, carefully, like something inside him still hurt every time he trusted the world. He stepped forward once, lowered his head, and pressed his nose gently against Nathan's hand. Nathan froze. The warmth of the dog's breath against his skin hit harder than he expected. Something old and guarded shifted quietly inside his chest. Not happiness. He had forgotten what that felt like. But maybe recognition. Like two ruined things realizing they spoke the same language. Melissa watched silently from the doorway. You are the first person he has approached in 3 months, she whispered. Nathan swallowed hard and scratched carefully behind Valor's ear. The shepherd closed his eyes for half a second, leaning into the touch with a tired sigh that sounded almost human. Nathan looked down at the dog, then toward the clipboard hanging outside the kennel. At the bottom of the page, written in red marker, were 2 words he understood immediately. Final hold. He stared at them longer than he meant to. Then he reached slowly into his back pocket and pulled out his worn leather wallet. Inside were a few folded bills, a gas receipt, and exactly $10 left to his name. Nathan stared at the $10 in his wallet as though the bills themselves might suddenly explain what he was doing. The leather felt cold in his hands, worn thin at the corners from years of being opened more often than filled. Outside, snow swept across the parking lot beneath the pale security lights, and somewhere beyond the shelter walls, a freight train groaned through the industrial district like a tired animal crossing the dark. Melissa stood quietly near the kennel gate, giving him space to think. She had seen people hesitate before. Families wanting puppies. Couples wanting something young enough to grow beside their children. Nobody came looking for old police dogs with scars and failing hips. Nathan looked back down at Valor. The shepherd had settled beside his boots now, silent and steady, one paw stretched forward across the concrete floor. Trust did not come easily to creatures abandoned by the world. Nathan knew that better than most. He rubbed his thumb slowly across the folded bills. $10. It was enough for half a tank of gas. Enough for cheap groceries if he stretched them carefully through the week. Enough to survive a few more days pretending things might somehow improve. But standing there beneath the harsh fluorescent lights with an aging German shepherd resting quietly at his feet, survival suddenly felt different than living. Melissa finally spoke softly. You do not have to decide tonight. Nathan let out a dry laugh under his breath. Yeah, he murmured. I think maybe I do. Valor lifted his head slightly at the sound of his voice. Nathan crouched beside him again, studying the old collar around the dog's neck. The leather carried faint cracks near the buckle, and tucked just beneath the edge of the strap, barely visible beneath the fur. Something metallic caught the light for half a second. Nathan frowned faintly, but said nothing. He reached up and scratched carefully behind Valor's ear again. The shepherd leaned gently into his hand. Not desperate, not needy, just tired, like a man accepting warmth after a long winter. Nathan swallowed hard and stood. What paperwork do you need? Melissa blinked once, surprised. You mean it? Nathan held out the bills before he could change his mind. Looks like he and I are both out of options. For the first time all evening, Melissa smiled fully. Not the polite smile people used with strangers. The real kind. The kind born from relief. She took the money carefully and disappeared toward the front office while Nathan remained beside the kennel. Valor watched him the entire time. 10 minutes later, the paperwork sat signed across the old wooden counter near the shelter entrance. Nathan barely read half of it. Medical disclosures, liability waivers, medication schedules. He signed everything with the same tired pen chained to the desk, while Valor waited beside him quietly on a faded blue leash Melissa had found in storage. Most retired canine dogs struggle their first few weeks, she warned gently. Nightmares, anxiety, loud sounds. Nathan gave a faint nod. Yeah, he said softly. People do too. The shelter grew quieter as closing time approached. Volunteers turned off lights one hallway at a time, and somewhere overhead the heating pipes rattled softly against the ceiling. Nathan pulled on his gloves and glanced toward the exit doors where snow swirled beneath the parking lot lamps. Then he felt it, a light pressure against his hand. Valor had moved closer without a sound, pressing his nose gently against Nathan's knuckles. Not obedience, not training. Something else. Something almost human. Nathan looked down at the old shepherd standing beside him beneath the dim light. For a moment, neither of them moved. Two worn souls. Two things life had nearly discarded. Then Nathan tightened his grip on the leash softly and whispered the words more to himself than the dog. Come on, partner. Let us go home. The drive back across Cleveland felt longer than it should have. Snow drifted lazily through the headlights while old brick buildings passed like tired ghosts beyond the windshield. Nathan drove with both hands tied on the wheel, the heater coughing weak bursts of lukewarm air into the cab of the aging pickup. Beside him, Valor sat quietly in the passenger seat without pacing or whining, just watching the city slide past the frosted windows with calm, unreadable eyes. Every few minutes the old shepherd glanced toward Nathan as though making certain he was still there. The roads grew emptier as midnight deepened. A liquor store sign buzzed red at the corner of East 79th. Two men smoked beneath a laundromat awning farther down the block. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed briefly before disappearing into the storm. Nathan finally pulled into the cracked parking lot behind his apartment building, a narrow three-story brick structure leaning slightly with age beside an abandoned bakery covered in graffiti. One security light flickered above the rear entrance. The rest had burned out months ago. Nathan killed the engine and sat motionless for a second. Not much to look at, he muttered quietly. Valor remained still beside him. Snowflakes melted slowly against the shepherd's dark fur as they climbed the narrow metal staircase toward the second floor. The hallway smelled faintly of radiator heat, old cigarettes, and stale cooking oil trapped deep inside the walls. Nathan unlocked apartment 2B and pushed the door open with one tired shoulder. The room beyond was small and dimly lit by a single lamp near the couch. A coffee mug sat untouched beside unpaid bills spread across the kitchen counter. The radiator hissed unevenly beneath the window, barely warming the space. Nathan stepped inside first, then paused. Well, he said softly, this is home. Valor entered slowly behind him. The shepherd's nails clicked quietly across the worn hardwood floor while he surveyed the apartment with careful eyes. Not nervous. Professional. Like an officer clearing a room from habit he could not forget. Nathan shrugged off his coat and hung it near the door before noticing Valor had stopped moving completely near the kitchen table. The old dog stood frozen, ears slightly raised, eyes fixed on something beneath the dim overhead light. Nathan frowned faintly. What is it? Valor took 2 slow steps forward and lowered his nose toward the floor near the baseboard heater. Then he sat abruptly, posture rigid. Nathan watched him for a moment before kneeling beside the spot. At first he saw nothing unusual. Dust, old wood, peeling paint near the wall. Then he noticed it. Wedged partly beneath the radiator pipe rested a tiny silver object no larger than a house key. Nathan reached carefully beneath the heater and pulled it free. A small metal tag, scratched, tarnished with age. His thumb brushed across the engraved surface while Valor watched silently beside him. Coordinates. Not a name, not a badge number, just a string of numbers etched into the steel plate. Nathan stared at them, confusion tightening across his face. What the hell is this? Valor's ears twitched slightly at the sound of his voice. Nathan turned the tag over in his hand again. The metal felt old but deliberate, as though someone had hidden it there on purpose long ago. Outside, wind rattled softly against the apartment windows while snow continued falling over the sleeping city. Nathan looked down at the old German shepherd sitting calmly beside him beneath the dim apartment light. Valor held his gaze for a long moment. Steady, patient, like he had been waiting for Nathan to find it. The apartment settled into silence after midnight, the kind of silence that made old memories louder. Wind pressed softly against the windows while the radiator hissed unevenly beside the wall like something struggling to stay alive. Nathan sat at the small kitchen table beneath the weak yellow light, turning the silver tag slowly between his fingers. The engraved coordinates stared back at him without explanation. Numbers only. No initials. No department marking. Nothing official. Yet something about it felt deliberate. Hidden. Important. Across the room, Valor lay near the couch with his head resting on his paws, though Nathan noticed the old shepherd was not sleeping. Every few moments, one amber eye opened toward the tag in Nathan's hand before closing again, as though the dog already knew where those numbers led. Nathan rubbed both hands over his tired face and leaned back in the chair. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee grounds, old wood, and melting snow drying from their boots near the heater. He had forgotten what it felt like to hear another living thing breathing inside the room. Strange how quickly loneliness noticed company. He glanced toward the clock on the microwave. 1:17 a.m. Tomorrow he was supposed to report for another overnight security shift guarding a half-empty warehouse near the riverfront. 8 hours of fluorescent lights and silence for barely enough money to survive. Nathan looked back down at the coordinates. Finally, curiosity won. He reached for the old laptop sitting at the edge of the counter and opened it slowly. The machine hummed and flickered awake with painful reluctance. Valor lifted his head immediately at the sound. Nathan typed the coordinates carefully into a map search. The screen loaded slowly beneath the dim kitchen light. Then the location appeared. An industrial district near the east side docks. Old storage facilities. Mostly abandoned now. Nathan frowned. He knew the area. Years ago, the police department used some of those warehouses for temporary evidence overflow before budget cuts shut everything down. Snow rattled softly against the windows again. Nathan stared harder at the map. Something cold moved quietly through his stomach. Before he could think further, a sudden sound shattered the silence. Thunder. Loud and close enough to shake the apartment windows. Valor reacted instantly. The old shepherd jerked upright with a low, startled breath, ears pinned back hard against his head. Nathan froze. Another roll of thunder followed overhead, deeper this time. Valor backed away from the window at once, muscles tense beneath his dark coat. Not aggression. Fear. Real fear. Nathan recognized it immediately because he had spent years hiding the exact same thing from other people. The storm outside intensified quickly. Rain began mixing with the snow, tapping sharply against the glass while distant lightning flickered pale blue across the apartment walls. Valor moved farther into the room and stopped near the kitchen table beside Nathan's chair. The dog's breathing had grown shallow now, controlled but uneasy. Nathan looked down at him quietly. Storms bother you too, huh? Valor did not move. Another flash lit the room. For a brief second, Nathan saw the shepherd trembling faintly beneath the dim light. Something inside his chest tightened unexpectedly. Without speaking, Nathan reached down beside the table and rested one hand carefully against the side of Valor's neck. Warm fur. Steady heartbeat. The old dog slowly leaned against his leg with a tired exhale that sounded almost relieved. Neither of them moved after that. Outside, thunder rolled over Cleveland while rain streaked down the windows in silver lines. Inside the tiny apartment, two broken survivors sat together beneath the weak kitchen light, listening to the storm pass overhead. Morning arrived gray and slow over Cleveland. Rainwater slid down the apartment windows in crooked lines while the city outside moved beneath a blanket of fog and melting snow. Nathan woke stiff on the couch just after 6, still wearing yesterday's shirt, one arm hanging toward the floor beside an empty coffee mug. For a few seconds he forgot where he was. Then he heard it, the soft rhythmic sound of breathing near the radiator. Valor slept curled tightly against the heater beneath the window, his old chest rising and falling steadily in the pale morning light. Nathan watched him quietly for a moment before sitting up with a tired groan. The apartment smelled faintly of rain, coffee, and wet fur now. Strange how quickly another life could change the feeling of a room. Nathan rubbed his hands over his face and stood slowly. His knees cracked from sleeping badly. Outside, tires hissed along rain-soaked streets several stories below, while somewhere nearby a delivery truck backed into an alley with sharp electronic beeps echoing between buildings. Valor opened one eye the moment Nathan moved toward the kitchen. Not startled. Alert. Like instinct never fully slept inside police dogs. "Morning, partner," Nathan muttered softly. The shepherd stretched carefully onto stiff legs, favoring his hip for half a step before walking toward the kitchen. Nathan filled an old metal bowl with water and searched the cabinets until he found half a box of crackers and a can of beef stew left over from last week. Not much, but enough for now. He split the stew into 2 bowls and set one carefully on the floor. Valor looked at him first before eating. Nathan noticed that too. Permission, training, respect. Habits built over years beside another officer now transferred quietly onto him. The realization settled strangely in his chest. Nathan poured himself burnt coffee from yesterday's pot and glanced toward the silver tag still resting beside the laptop on the kitchen table. The coordinates seemed heavier in daylight somehow. Less mysterious. More real. Valor finished eating and immediately walked toward the table, stopping beside the chair where Nathan had sat the night before. The old shepherd lifted his nose toward the metal tag, ears twitching once. Nathan frowned faintly. "You really want me to go there, do not you?" Valor held his gaze steadily. No bark, no movement, just those calm amber eyes that somehow carried more understanding than most people Nathan had known lately. He looked back toward the map still open on the laptop screen. The warehouse district sat barely 20 minutes away near the old docks east of downtown. Most of the buildings had been abandoned years ago after the city shifted operations farther north. If there was something hidden there, chances were nobody had touched it in a long time. Nathan leaned back in the chair slowly. Common sense told him to forget it. He already had enough problems. Late rent, debt collectors, a life held together by temporary jobs and fading pride. Chasing old secrets hidden inside a dead officer's dog collar sounded like the kind of mistake broken men made when they had nothing left to lose. Then he looked down at Valor again. The shepherd remained beside the table without moving, posture calm but focused. Waiting, trusting him to decide. Nathan stared into his coffee for a long moment while rain tapped softly against the windows behind them. Finally, he stood and grabbed his keys from the counter. "All right," he murmured quietly. One quick look. Valor's ears lifted immediately. Not excitement exactly. Recognition. Like something long unfinished had finally started moving again. Outside, the rain continued falling over Cleveland while 2 unlikely partners stepped quietly into the cold morning together. Rain hung low over the east side docks like a curtain of smoke as Nathan guided the pickup through rows of abandoned industrial buildings near the river. Rusted chain-link fences leaned sideways beneath years of lake wind, and old warehouse windows stared blankly across puddles dark as oil. Cleveland always looked older near the water. Tired. Forgotten. The truck tires crunched slowly over broken gravel while Valor sat upright in the passenger seat, unusually alert now. His ears remained forward the entire drive, body tense beneath the faded black harness Melissa had found at the shelter. Nathan noticed it immediately. The old shepherd was not confused. He knew this place. "Easy, partner," Nathan murmured quietly, though he was not sure whether he meant the words for the dog or himself. The coordinates led them toward a narrow service road tucked behind a row of shuttered storage units covered in peeling numbers and faded warning signs. Most of the district had been abandoned after the city cut funding years earlier. Nathan remembered working patrol nearby during his final years on the force. Back then the area had already felt hollow after dark. Now it looked almost swallowed by time. He parked beside an old brick warehouse with boarded windows and a collapsing loading dock sagging toward the muddy pavement. Rain tapped steadily against the windshield while Nathan studied the building through the fogged glass. Warehouse 14B. The faded numbers barely remained visible beside a rusted metal door. Valor let out a low sound deep in his throat. Not a growl. Recognition. Nathan looked at him sharply. You have been here before. The shepherd's amber eyes remained fixed on the building ahead. Nathan stepped out into the cold drizzle, pulling his coat tighter while water soaked immediately into the shoulders of the fabric. Valor followed close beside him without needing the leash tightened once. The air smelled of wet concrete, river water, and old machinery left too long in silence. Somewhere nearby, a loose metal panel banged softly in the wind. Nathan approached the warehouse entrance carefully. The padlock hanging from the chain looked ancient, thick with rust, but the side service door beside it sat slightly crooked against the frame. Not forced open, just old. Forgotten. He pushed slowly. The hinges groaned loudly as the door opened inward several inches. Darkness waited beyond it. Valor stepped inside first. Nathan hesitated only a moment before following. The warehouse smelled of dust, mildew, and stale air trapped for years beneath the leaking roof. Weak daylight filtered through cracks high above them, painting pale silver lines across the concrete floor. Empty shelves stretched toward the far wall like skeletons. Rain dripped steadily somewhere deeper inside the building. Valor moved ahead slowly at first, nose low, paws silent against the floor despite his age. Nathan followed carefully, his heartbeat beginning to quicken for reasons he could not explain. Then suddenly the shepherd stopped. Near the back corner of the warehouse, half hidden beneath a collapsed tarp and broken wooden pallets, Valor sat down hard beside a section of cracked concrete floor. His ears remained locked forward. Waiting. Nathan frowned and moved closer. What is it? Valor pawed once at the floor. Not random scratching. Intentional. Nathan stared down at the concrete. Hairline cracks spread across the surface near an old drainage pipe. One section looked slightly uneven compared to the rest. He crouched slowly and brushed away years of dust and dirt with his sleeve. Something metallic reflected faintly beneath the grime. His pulse quickened. Nathan found an old pry bar leaning against a nearby shelf and wedged it carefully beneath the cracked edge. The concrete slab shifted with a grinding sound before lifting just enough to reveal a narrow hollow beneath the floor. Inside sat a weatherproof black storage case coated in dust. Nathan froze completely. Rain echoed softly through the warehouse roof, while Valor remained perfectly still beside him. Nathan lifted the case out slowly with trembling hands. The plastic felt cold and heavy. On the front, nearly faded beyond recognition, sat an old Cleveland police evidence seal, dated 9 years earlier. Nathan stared at it in disbelief, while something deep and buried inside his memory began waking up all at once. Nathan carried the black storage case back to the truck beneath a sky heavy with rain and low gray clouds. Water dripped from the edge of his coat, while Valor walked close beside him, never straying more than a few feet away. The old shepherd looked exhausted now, his limp slightly worse after moving across the uneven warehouse floor. But there was something different in his posture too. Purpose, like a burden carried too long, had finally begun lifting. Nathan placed the case carefully on the passenger seat and stared at it through the rain-streaked window before climbing behind the wheel. His hands trembled slightly against the steering wheel. 9 years earlier. Cleveland police evidence seal. Something hidden beneath concrete inside an abandoned warehouse only a retired canine seemed to remember existed. None of it felt accidental anymore. The drive back home passed in silence, except for the soft rhythm of windshield wipers scraping rain from the glass. Nathan kept glancing toward the case beside Valor every few seconds as though afraid it might disappear if he looked away too long. The city moved around them in muted colors. Brick buildings soaked dark with rain. Steam rising from manhole covers. Traffic lights glowing through the mist like fading embers. Cleveland had always been a city that carried its scars openly. Nathan understood that now more than ever. Back inside the apartment, the radiator hissed weakly while wet boots dripped onto the old hardwood floor near the door. Valor moved immediately toward the kitchen table and lowered himself slowly beside it with a tired grunt. Nathan noticed how carefully the old shepherd protected his hip now. Age had stolen speed from him, but not awareness. Never awareness. Nathan set the case on the table beneath the yellow overhead light and stared at the rusted latch. His pulse thudded quietly in his ears. For a moment, he almost walked away from it. Some instincts never left police officers, and one of the strongest was knowing when something buried should probably stay buried. But then Valor lifted his head from the floor and looked directly at him again. Calm, steady, waiting. Nathan exhaled slowly and opened the case. Inside sat several weatherproof folders stacked beside a small external hard drive wrapped carefully in plastic. A badge rested near the corner beneath the files. Old Cleveland Metro K-9 Division. Officer Daniel Mercer. Nathan frowned faintly. The name stirred something distant in his memory. Then he remembered. Mercer had been Valor's original handler. Good reputation. Quiet guy. Died suddenly during retirement, according to department rumors. Nathan picked up the hard drive carefully while rain rattled softly against the apartment windows. Beneath it lay a handwritten note folded twice. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. Nathan unfolded it slowly. If you are seeing this, trust the dog. Nathan read the sentence twice. Then a third time. His chest tightened unexpectedly. The handwriting looked rushed, uneven in places, like someone had written it under pressure. Valor remained motionless near the table, watching every movement Nathan made. Nathan swallowed hard and plugged the hard drive into the old laptop. The machine hummed softly while the files loaded one by one across the screen. Video archives, case reports, audio recordings, most dated nearly a decade earlier. Then Nathan saw a folder name that stopped him cold. Internal Investigation 47A. His own name appeared directly beneath it. Nathan's stomach dropped. Rain hammered harder against the windows now, while thunder rolled faintly somewhere beyond the city skyline. He clicked the file open with shaking fingers. Grainy body camera footage filled the screen. Nighttime. Rain. Police lights reflecting across wet pavement. Nathan stared in disbelief at the younger version of himself moving through the frame beside several officers outside a warehouse near the docks. The same warehouse. Voices crackled through static. Then another face appeared briefly on camera. Captain Richard Vance. Nathan froze instantly. Vance had supervised the investigation that destroyed Nathan's career years earlier. Corruption allegations. Missing narcotics evidence. Department betrayal. Nathan had spent years blamed for evidence that vanished during that operation. His badge gone. His reputation buried. His entire life slowly collapsing afterward. On screen, the footage continued. Then suddenly Valor appeared beside Officer Mercer in the rain, barking sharply toward a stack of evidence crates, while Mercer shouted something impossible to hear clearly through the static. Nathan leaned closer to the screen, heartbeat rising fast now. Because for the first time in 9 years, he realized something unbearable. The dog had been trying to warn them all along. The apartment felt smaller after the truth entered it. Rain continued falling outside the windows while the old laptop screen flickered softly across Nathan's face, painting tired shadows beneath his eyes. Valor had not moved from beside the kitchen table. The old shepherd watched the screen with quiet focus, ears twitching faintly each time the distorted voices crackled through the speakers. Nathan leaned closer toward the footage, one hand pressed hard against his mouth now. The body camera recording skipped briefly before stabilizing again. Officer Mercer stood near the evidence crates inside the warehouse, while Valor barked sharply beside him, pulling hard against the leash toward one specific container near the back wall. Nathan remembered the moment suddenly. At the time, Captain Richard Vance had dismissed the dog's reaction as confusion caused by narcotics residue. The investigation had continued anyway. Then the evidence disappeared days later. Nathan had been blamed because he was the last officer assigned inside the warehouse that night. His suspension followed within weeks. After that came the headlines. Internal betrayal. Mishandled evidence. Department corruption. Nobody listened when Nathan swore he had been set up. Nobody except one old canine handler who apparently trusted his dog more than the department itself. Nathan clicked deeper into the archive files. More reports appeared. Hidden copies of evidence logs. Internal memos Mercer had secretly duplicated before his death. Then one final video file sat alone at the bottom of the folder. Recorded 6 months before Mercer died. Nathan opened it slowly. The screen filled with grainy footage from a small living room lit by a single lamp. Mercer looked older than Nathan remembered, thinner, exhausted. Valor rested beside his chair, younger then, but carrying the same steady eyes. Mercer looked directly into the camera and spoke quietly. If this video is being watched, it means I probably ran out of time. Nathan felt his chest tighten immediately. Outside, thunder rolled low over the city while rain streaked against the windows. Mercer continued speaking carefully, like a man choosing every word with painful precision. Valor alerted on the wrong crate that night, because there was something hidden inside it nobody else was supposed to find. Vance moved the narcotics himself before the inventory review. Nathan Hale never touched the evidence. Nathan stopped breathing for a second. The room suddenly felt too quiet around him. Mercer looked down briefly in the recording before continuing. I tried reporting it internally. Nobody would listen. Too many people owed Vance favors. Too many careers depended on staying quiet. Valor shifted slightly beside the table as though recognizing his old handler's voice even now. Nathan swallowed hard, while Mercer's tired face filled the screen again. I hid the originals because if anything happened to me, I knew Valor would remember where they were. Dogs remember what good men forget. The video ended abruptly. Silence settled across the apartment except for the rain. Nathan leaned back slowly in the chair, stunned beyond words. 9 years. 9 years carrying shame that never belonged to him. 9 years watching friends disappear, jobs vanish, and pieces of himself slowly erode under accusations built on someone else's betrayal. He looked down toward Valor. The old shepherd remained beside him quietly beneath the kitchen light, his cloudy eye reflecting faint gold from the screen. Nathan stared at him for a long moment before finally reaching down with trembling fingers to rest his hand gently against the side of the dog's neck. Valor leaned into the touch immediately, trusting, certain, like he had waited all this time simply to bring the truth home. Nathan's voice broke softly in the silence. You remembered. The old shepherd closed his eyes for a moment beneath Nathan's hand, while thunder rolled far beyond the rain-soaked streets of Cleveland. And for the first time in nearly a decade, Nathan Hale no longer felt like a man drowning in darkness. Because an old forgotten police dog had carried the light back to him all along.